In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 29, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Colorado versus Iowa State. Colorado heads into Hilton Coliseum tonight feeling a bit like the student who studied some of the material, but not the part that actually shows up on the test. Iowa State, on the other hand, walks in looking much more like the organized kid with the color-coded notes and way too much caffeine. Oddsmakers did not exactly play it safe with this number. We are looking at Iowa State favored by roughly 17.5 points at home, with that spread hanging there like a dare for anyone who gets nervous around big favorites. That kind of line instantly makes people think, is this too many points? Honestly, that is part of the fun, because when a spread is this large, you are not just picking a winner, you are betting on how ruthless one team is willing to be. Colorado's profile this season pretty much explains why the number is so inflated. They sit at 12-8 overall and 2-5 in their early Big 12 run, and the recent script has been rough. They are coming off that 95-86 home loss to UCF, where the Knights shot over 60% from the floor and over 62% from 3. That is not just hot shooting. That is your defense leaving the doors and windows open. It also marked a 5th straight conference loss, which is exactly the kind of skid that exposes who you are on the less glamorous end of the floor. Across the floor, Iowa State brings a very different energy. They are sitting at 18-2, ranked 8th in the latest poll, and Hilton has basically turned into a bad dream for visiting teams. All of that happening in the same building Colorado now has to walk into is not a small detail. Hilton Magic is not just a slogan, it is a real thing when this team gets rolling. The scary part is that the numbers like Iowa State just as much as the vibes do. Across public advanced models, they sit in that national top tier on defense, top 10 in defensive efficiency, and they are giving up under a point per possession on average. That means a Colorado team that already struggles to string together stops now has to solve a defense that is both connected and unforgiving. It is like trying to fix a leaky faucet while someone keeps turning up the water pressure. And the track record against real competition backs this up. This is the same Iowa State squad that walked into Mackey Arena and handed then number 1 Purdue an 81-58 beating that tied a record for the largest home loss by a top-ranked team. They also held a high-powered Iowa offense to 62 points in the Cy-Hawk matchup, which says a lot about how their defensive ceiling holds up when the lights are bright. So when you look back at those home blowouts, it is pretty clear they are not just fattening up on overmatched by games. On the Colorado side, the season-long numbers basically shout the story. They score north of 82 points per game, but they allow about 78, which pushes their defensive metrics down toward the bottom third of Division I. It is the stat sheet version of controlled chaos, lots of scoring, not much structure, and a tendency for games to tilt into track meet territory. Now imagine that defensive group, the same one that let UCF carve them up with clean looks and sharp spacing, trying to survive a true road environment against a long, turnover-hunting Iowa State defense that lives on pressure. Put all of that together, and that giant spread starts to feel a lot less like a trap and a lot more like a reflection of where these two programs are right now. This is not financial advice, and lines can absolutely move during the day, but when you stack current form, verified stats, and the way these teams actually play on the floor, the story that keeps emerging is one where the home team slowly cranks up the pressure, feeds off a couple of classic Hilton runs, and keeps the visitors from ever really getting this back to a 1 or 2 possession sweat. As our first pick for this matchup, the Iowa State Cyclones to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The books have set this matchup's total in the mid-150s, around 153.5 to 154.5, which sends a pretty loud message. They are expecting points, and the first instinct for a lot of bettors is to glance at Colorado's scores and think, yeah, that tracks. Colorado's season stats certainly play into that perception. They average more than 80 points per game and give up close to 80 themselves, so the box scores tend to look busy. That recent 95-86 shootout against UCF fits the pattern. Both teams shooting well, pace picking up, scoreboard flying, and defenses kind of existing for decoration. When you watch those games, it is easy to feel like any total in this range might still not be high enough. Here is the thing though, that viewpoint leans hard on season-long numbers that include a bunch of softer non-conference opponents and friendlier situations. When you overlay Iowa State's defensive identity on top of that, the picture changes a lot. They allow under 65 points per game on the year. They sit in the top cluster nationally in scoring defense and defensive efficiency, and the advanced metrics are not shy about how good they are. We are talking about a group that forces mistakes, contests everything, and treats clean looks like a luxury. They have already dragged some very capable offenses into low-scoring nights. Purdue, with that high-powered attack, ended up with 58. Iowa, which usually fills it up, finished with 62. UCF, the same team that just rang up 95 on Colorado and Boulder, managed only 57 when it had to deal with Iowa State's ball pressure and that energy inside Hilton. Those are not cherry-picked one-offs. They are part of a clear pattern where Iowa State imposes its will on the rhythm of a game. Tempo also matters here, and neither of these teams is racing up and down non-stop. Both sit roughly around the national average in possessions per game, which means we are not looking at some 90-possession sprint. To reach a total in the mid-150s at that pace, you need sustained scoring efficiency from both sides. That is precisely what Iowa State is trying to prevent. They want each Colorado possession to feel like a chore, not a transition highlight. There is another subtle piece that often gets overlooked. Games with a big spread can actually work against high totals in certain scripts. If the favorite pulls away, you tend to see longer possessions from the team in front, deeper bench rotations late, and a lot less incentive for the trailing side to extend things with constant fouling. Instead of a frantic final 2 minutes full of free throws, you sometimes get both teams content to just dribble, run clock, and get out healthy. That kind of closing stretch quietly clips several points off a final score. All of this is coming from current season style, pace data, and recent results, not from wishful thinking or outdated trends. We are assuming normal availability, no wild late injury swings, and a game where Iowa State's defense looks like itself in front of its home crowd. When you combine Colorado's tendency to run into trouble against physical defenses with Iowa State's proven ability to squeeze the life out of enemy offenses, that mid-150s total feels a bit inflated compared to how this matchup is likely to look possession by possession. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Liberty versus Middle Tennessee. Liberty and Middle Tennessee meet on a Thursday night in Murfreesboro, and it feels less like a regular conference game and more like a personality clash on hardwood. One side wants everything neat, measured, and scripted possession by possession, while the other is happy to scrap, lean on muscle, and see what the crowd can shake loose. The stage is Murphy Center, Middle Tennessee's home floor, with tip on January 29, 2026, American time. Sportsbooks like DraftKings list Liberty as a small road favorite, hovering around a spread in that 1.5 to 2.5 point range, while the projected total sits in the mid-130s, around 136.5 points. It is the kind of setup where the line is basically saying, we know who has been better so far, but we also respect this building and this home team. Honestly, if you just glance at how Liberty has been playing in this Conference USA run, it is hard not to notice the control they bring to games. They come in with a record of 17-3-0 overall and a spotless 9-0-0 in league play, sitting right at the top of the conference pile. They have stacked wins at home and on the road, including victories at places like Sam Houston and Western Kentucky, so this group already knows what it feels like to walk into someone else's gym and walk back out with the result they wanted. Their style leans slow, deliberate, and detail-heavy, with one of the slower tempos in Division I, and they squeeze real efficiency out of those limited possessions. Instead of trying to crash the offensive glass with reckless energy, Liberty chooses to value spacing, shot selection, and ball security. They are one of those teams that usually hits a high percentage from deep and inside the arc, and they rarely hand out free possessions through sloppy turnovers. They also defend without fouling much, which matters on the road, because sending a home team to the line over and over is how a game can flip in a hurry. So for a bettor or a fan, this is that classic grown-up offense and grown-up defense package that does not rely on chaos to win. Middle Tennessee brings a different flavor to the table, and it is not exactly subtle. They sit at 11-8-0 overall and 5-3-0 in league play. A few games back in the standings, but they have been tough in their own building with a good recent run of home wins. Their identity leans into size, rebounding, and that familiar wave of energy you get in a college gym when the home team strings together a couple of stops. They pull down more boards per game than Liberty, with a notable edge on the glass that shows up most nights, and they use that to extend possessions and take away second chances for opponents. Shooting-wise, they are not as smooth or efficient as Liberty, who usually sit near the top tier nationally in field goal and three-point accuracy. Middle Tennessee tends to live in the mid-range of efficiency, more grinded out and get extra attempts than hit everything from everywhere. Their rim protection and physical play help them drag opponents into heavy traffic near the basket, and that is one way they can try to bother a clean, system-heavy offense like Liberty's. It is almost like they are saying, if you are going to beat us, you will feel it tomorrow. From a betting angle, the recent trends tell a fairly interesting story. Liberty is on a 10-game straight-up winning streak, and they have covered the number in 4 of their last 6 games, which is a decent sign that the market has not totally caught up with their level yet. They have also been reliable in this part of the schedule, covering in most of their recent January outings. Middle Tennessee, on the other hand, has dropped against the spread in 5 of their last 6, which suggests that while they might scrape out some wins, they are not consistently finishing games in a way that rewards people backing them with the number. Here is the thing, this spread is small enough that it turns into almost a philosophy question. Who do you trust more over 40 minutes, the team that has been ruthlessly steady in conference and has already shown it can win away from home, or the team that leans on physicality, rebounding, and a lively crowd but has been up and down at the betting window? Liberty's slow tempo, elite efficiency, and habit of not beating themselves travel well because a structured half-court offense and careful defense are not that sensitive to noise or environment. Middle Tennessee's path is more fragile. They need to win the rebounding margin, protect the rim, and hope Liberty's shooting cools off in a hostile setting. With a spread of around that 1 to 2 bucket window, you are really weighing consistency and ceiling more than anything else. And so, after all that, the lean points toward the side that has been better overall, more reliable in league play, and already tested on the road. As our first pick for this matchup, the Liberty Flames to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now, shifting away from who covers and toward how this thing might look on the scoreboard, the total sitting around 136.5 is a curious number. It hints at a game where both teams live somewhere in that mid-60s to low 70s range, something like a 70-67 or 69-65 type finish. That is not a shootout, but it is not a rock stuck in the mud either. It is a middle ground that tries to respect Liberty's offense while also respecting how both teams can guard. Liberty's season profile makes that point pretty clearly. They usually score just under 80 points a night while holding opponents in the high 60s, and they do it with one of the best shooting efficiency profiles you will see, strong from the perimeter and very strong inside the arc. The kicker is that they manage those numbers while playing at a slow pace, one of the slowest in the country. That means every possession is worth more, but there are fewer of them, which is where totals can get tricky. You can have a team that looks explosive on paper, but when you stretch those points across a low-possession environment, you end up with scores that look tidy rather than wild. Middle Tennessee operates a little quicker, usually living a few possessions per game faster than Liberty. Their offense tends to land in the mid-70s, while opponents float in the low 70s, so their box scores can look slightly noisier. They do not usually match Liberty's shooting efficiency, but they use the glass and physical play to squeeze extra attempts out of games. If you picture their ideal night, it is them forcing misses, cleaning the boards, and getting into early offense before the other team sets up. So the tension with this total is simple. Does Liberty's pace and structure pull the game down into a lower scoring rhythm, or does Middle Tennessee drag it towards something a bit faster, with more shots and more transition moments? History leans toward a certain pattern. Liberty games have seen the under land in 9 of their last 13, which lines up with their methodical offense and careful defense. On those Thursday slots, they have leaned under more often than not too, which reinforces that the style usually stays the same. Middle Tennessee has not exactly been riding a wave of overs either, with 9 of their last 12 games finishing under the number. Their contests often turn into half-court battles with physical defense and plenty of contact, even though the pace is a bit quicker than Liberty's. You end up with games that feel intense and competitive, but the actual point totals sit in a fairly moderate band instead of exploding upward. Let me explain how those pieces fit together for this matchup specifically. Liberty's slow tempo and reluctance to crash the offensive glass hard. They sit near the bottom nationally in offensive rebounding rate, cut down on scramble situations where the ball is flying around and defenses are out of position. Middle Tennessee's strength on the glass absolutely extends possessions, but many of those extra shots come in traffic near the rim rather than in clean, open space. That combination can create a kind of grind where every possession feels important, the crowd is loud, and yet the scoreboard is not racing. For anyone holding an over ticket, that kind of game can be maddening because the action feels big while the numbers on the board creep along. There is still a path to a higher scoring outcome, and it is worth saying, if Middle Tennessee manages to speed Liberty up a bit, forcing more turnovers than usual, and turning some of those long rebounds or live ball mistakes into transition chances, the possession count can climb. If, on top of that, Liberty's elite shooting form travels perfectly and they land in the mid-70s on efficient shooting, the final total can start to flirt with or clear that mid-130s mark. That is the more volatile script, the one where both teams play closer to their offensive ceilings at the same time. But if you step back and look at the broader season patterns, the slower tempo Liberty prefers, and the way both teams have leaned toward lower totals in recent weeks, the more grounded expectation points toward a controlled, tactical game. Plenty of intensity, plenty of physicality, but scoring that stays in check rather than spiraling into a track meet. So the lean, based on pace, efficiency, and recent totals history, tilts toward a slightly quieter scoreboard than the number suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. UMBC versus Vermont. This matchup in Vermont has that classic feel where reputation and reality are not quite walking in step. You have the long-term conference power at home, comfortable in its own gym, carrying that familiar aura of "this is our league," lining up against the program that most casual fans still remember from that one historic tournament shocker. On the surface, it is easy to assume the home side will simply lean on history, the crowd, and the banners on the wall and turn this into a comfortable win. And here is the thing, once you look at what these two have actually done this season rather than what they have meant in past years, the gap looks much thinner than the spread suggests. Both teams live in the same neighborhood in terms of points scored and allowed, sitting in that mid-70s for themselves and right around 70 given up. That is the kind of profile that usually produces games decided by a couple of possessions, not wire-to-wire blowouts. The posted number around 7.5 points is asking the home side to win by more than its typical scoring margin, while the visitors have quietly built a slightly stronger average margin of their own. It is a small detail, but when you are talking spreads, small edges matter. Honestly, what makes this even more interesting is how UMBC's style holds up against the favorite's strengths. Vermont can absolutely shoot from deep, we all know that, but UMBC is not walking in with a soft perimeter defense. They hit from three at a strong clip themselves and also hold opponents to a low percentage from outside, so they are not just hoping the home team has an off night, they actually have the tools to bother those shots. That changes the feel of the matchup, because the favorites usual will just bury you with threes. Rhythm is less automatic when the guy closing out is actually in your jersey. But then you get to the whistle, and that is where things tilt even more toward a competitive game. In conference play, UMBC has been living at the free throw line, piling up a huge advantage and made free throws compared with their league opponents. That is not just a random streak. It tells you something about their aggression, their willingness to attack, and their knack for drawing contact. On the road, especially as underdogs, that kind of profile keeps you afloat when the other team inevitably strings together a run in front of its own fans. You can almost picture it. The home team hits a couple of threes, the place gets loud, and then UMBC settles things down by getting downhill, taking the bump, and cashing in at the stripe. As of the latest reports for this specific game date, both teams are listing full rosters with no key injuries flagged on official notes or common tracking sites, so we are not baking in any thin rotations or surprise scratches here. You are essentially handicapping two first-place level America East teams meeting with full arsenals available, which only reinforces the idea that asking one side to win by multiple full possessions is a stretch. All of that, put together, paints a picture of a road underdog that matches the favorite in efficiency, counters its primary weapon, and leans on a real free throw edge to keep this thing close. As our first pick for this matchup, the UMBC Retrievers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now let us talk about the total, because this is where the matchup has a slightly different personality. If you only looked at pace numbers or how often these teams get up and down the floor, you might think this is just another methodical conference game. But when you remember how many points they squeeze out of those possessions, the picture changes pretty fast. UMBC usually lands in the mid-70s on the scoreboard while giving up around 70. Vermont hangs out in basically the same range for and against. If you add that up, the average game for each team lands in that mid-140s zone, and that is already above a total sitting in the low 140s. So even before you get cute with matchups or late-game quirks, the basic math suggests there is enough scoring power here to push past the posted number. Let me explain why the style mix matters so much. Both teams shoot it well from the field and from three, and they are not shy about taking those shots. You are not watching two grinded-out offenses that chew up the shot clock and then fling something at the rim. Instead, you have efficient, confident groups that can turn a quiet stretch into a quick 8 or 10 points. Games like that can feel slow for a few minutes, and then you look up and see the total climbing because one side hit back-to-back threes and the other answered with a three and a pair of free throws. Speaking of free throws, that same whistle factor that helps UMBC as an underdog on the spread also quietly nudges the total upward. Both teams shoot respectably at the line, floating in the low to mid-70s percentage-wise. If this game stays competitive and the total suggests a reasonably tight script, you can very easily get those classic conference game endings where the clock stops, the bonus and double bonus kick in, and points pile up without much time running off. Anyone who has sweated an over or an under in college hoops knows that the last 90 seconds can feel like a completely different sport. There is a small wrinkle here. Recent trends have shown Vermont playing to the under in several of its latest outings, which might scare people off the over at first glance. But a closer look at their home games shows that when they are in their own gym, with their shooting comfort and the usual late-game fouling patterns, totals have been more likely to sneak past modest numbers like this. So you have this funny tension, one set of trends pointing one way and the environment pointing another. In a case like that, it helps to lean back on the core identity of both teams, and that identity is efficient offense, plenty of shooting, and enough trips to the line to keep the scoreboard active. Of course, any call on a total is still a projection. You are betting on how well a bunch of college players shoot and finish on one particular night in late January, and that always carries some uncertainty. But when you stack the numbers, the styles, the likely game flow, and the current market total together, the more reasonable expectation is that this contest produces a score that lands above what the books are dealing. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Florida Atlantic versus Memphis. On the surface, a Memphis home game looks like one of those classic spots where the name brand and the arena crowd are supposed to carry the story. You see the jerseys, you picture FedEx Forum buzzing, and it is easy to assume the Tigers are the ones who should control the night. Odds makers lean into that perception a bit, hanging Memphis as a small favorite even though Florida Atlantic walks in with the stronger record, the better recent rhythm, and an offense that has been more reliable over the long stretch of this season. These two already met earlier in the month, and that first matchup ended with Florida Atlantic winning by a comfortable margin in a game where their calm half-court execution and confident shooting made Memphis look like it was chasing from behind for most of the evening. That first meeting did not feel like a random hot shooting burst. It felt like a group that trusted its depth, spaced the floor, and kept Memphis off balance with different scoring options while still holding the Tigers in check compared to what they normally expect on offense. Now the same Florida Atlantic squad comes into the return game with that result in its back pocket, and instead of facing a mystery, it knows exactly which matchups and actions worked, even though the setting is tougher and the crowd is no longer friendly. Memphis, on the other hand, is still leaning heavily on its lead guard and a couple of streaky wings for scoring, which can look great in spurts but can also dry up quickly if the whistle, the spacing, or the shot selection is even slightly off. In a tight conference battle where the spread only offers a small cushion, that gap in offensive stability matters because the team that can answer every run with smart possessions, get to the free throw line, and knock down timely threes tends to keep the scoreboard close even if the opponent has the louder building. Florida Atlantic fits that profile right now, a composed group that can weather swings, string together solid trips in crunch time, and hang right inside a short number or even flip the script late if Memphis cannot solve the same problems that showed up in the first meeting. As our first pick for this matchup, the Florida Atlantic Owls to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Florida Atlantic has been putting up more than 80 points per night. Memphis sits in the low 70s. And honestly, casual bettors see those averages and immediately think this rematch should follow the same script with constant scoring and very few dry spells. Odds makers clearly respect that narrative because the projected total sits in the low 150s, which is a number that almost feels like a challenge for anyone who remembers how wild the tempo and scoring looked the first time around. Here is the thing, second meetings in conference play often feel very different, as coaches have fresh film, matchups get attacked more deliberately, and every possession starts to carry more weight in the standings. In games like this, with one team trying to stay near the top of the league and the other trying to steady a shaky season, you often see more patience from both benches, longer half-court sets, and a willingness to trade a quick shot for a better look later in the clock. Florida Atlantic has the depth and versatility to slow the tempo when it suits them, and over a larger stretch Memphis has shown an offense that prefers attacking the paint, playing through contact, and grinding through the lane rather than living off constant highlight threes. Both sides have real incentive to value control over pace, since Florida Atlantic does not want to feed Memphis easy transition chances in a loud building, and Memphis knows that its most comfortable style involves a more physical, whistle-heavy game instead of a full-speed sprint. On top of that, Florida Atlantic is already down a young guard for the season, which trims a bit of pure backcourt speed, while Memphis may not have a fully healthy version of one of its perimeter scorers because of that ankle concern, and that combination quietly pulls some burst and spacing out of the matchup. When you layer all of that together, the picture looks less like a repeat of a shootout and more like a game with stretches of solid defense, a few empty trips on each side, and enough slow, methodical sequences that the final combined total can land under a number that was set high to account for the memory of their first meeting rather than how this rematch actually projects. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Washington versus Illinois. So picture this matchup for a second. A loud gym, bright lights, and Washington walking in as the team nobody really expects to control the night. You can almost feel that familiar script start to form, big name on one bench, comfortable at home, and this so-called underdog on the other side just being asked to keep things respectable. Here is the thing, Washington does not need to be perfect to make this interesting, they just need to be stubborn. Teams that hang around in these spots usually do a few simple things well. They do not hand the ball away for free, they do not get bullied on the glass, and they answer runs with just enough of their own that the building never quite gets to celebrate early. If you have watched enough college hoops on a weeknight card, you know that is often what separates a quiet cover from a blowout that is over by the first media timeout. Washington fits that gritty profile more than their label suggests. They tend to play with a kind of chip on the shoulder energy, like they are tired of hearing what they supposedly cannot do, and that matters when every possession in the middle stretch of the game feels like a little test. When the favorite throws that big punch in the second half, and they always do, the teams that cash as underdogs are the ones that take that punch, wobble a little, then calmly run their stuff instead of panicking. Let me explain why that style helps. In these road environments, the crowd wants a knockout run, a 12-0 burst that turns a close game into a party. A patient, physical underdog is like a wet blanket on that momentum. They slow the emotional roller coaster, they force the home team to work late in the shot clock, and they turn what could have been a 20-point runaway into one of those awkward 10-point leads that never feels totally safe for the favorite and never feels totally dead if you are holding the points. There is also a mental side that people sometimes brush past. The favorite hears all week how they should roll, how this number is justified, and how this is just another step on a bigger path. Washington, on the other hand, gets to play a little freer. They know the pressure is tilted to the other bench. That freedom often shows up in the little things, loose balls, hustle plays, second and third efforts on defense that do not show up in the box score but chip away at big margins and keep the scoreboard respectable. Honestly, this is the kind of game where the underdog does not have to shock the world to reward anyone who believed in them. They just have to keep answering the bell. A slow start can be answered by a steady middle stretch. A double-digit deficit can quietly shrink to something more manageable with a couple of timely buckets and a few defensive stops. By the time the final minutes roll around, you are not asking them to stage some miracle. You are simply asking them to finish the same job they have been doing all night, refusing to let the game completely get away. As our first pick for this matchup, the Washington Huskies to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Let us talk about the total, because this matchup has that sneaky feel where the number on the board might not quite match the rhythm on the floor. Here is the thing, when you get a higher profile matchup in a loud building, the early few minutes can look wild. Fast shots, a couple of heat check jumpers, maybe even a quick flurry that makes you think the scoreboard operator is about to have a workout. But once the nerves settle and the coaches start to really put their fingerprints on possessions, you see more sets, more half-court touches, and more sequences where players are told to value the ball first and the highlight play second. That simple shift from chaos to control eats into the total without anyone really noticing in the moment. Another subtle piece is how often these games turn into physical battles. Bodies bang in the paint, cutters get bumped, and screens turn into mini wrestling matches. When that happens, officials tend to step in, whistles start to show up more often, and possessions stretch. Trips to the free throw line may look good for scoring, but they also slow everything down. They break rhythm, they cool shooters, and they turn what could have been quick three-point attempts into long, two-shot pauses. You also have those classic stretches where both teams just cannot buy a bucket for a few minutes. Every fan has lived that sequence: open threes that rim out, layups that roll off, mid-range pull-ups that feel good leaving the hand but catch back iron. In a high-total environment, those little droughts hurt. A 3-minute cold spell in each half is more than enough to drag a game away from a lofty number, especially if the coaches respond with timeouts, drawn-out huddles, and even more structure on the next possessions. Honestly, pace is as much about intent as it is about raw speed. If both sides decide they would rather get a good look than a quick look, shot clocks get chewed up, secondary breaks get pulled out, and early offense turns into a lot of probing and resetting. For viewers at home, it still feels intense, it still feels big, but the actual number of clean, fast-scoring chances shrinks little by little. By the time you reach those final minutes, the game can be tight, the crowd can be loud, yet the total is still sitting in a range that feels a bit lighter than what the pre-game number suggested. This is the kind of matchup where people might expect a track meet, but the combination of nerves, coaching control, physicality, and those small scoring droughts all work quietly in the same direction. If you have ever watched a game where you looked up at the final score and thought, "That felt intense, but the score is not as high as I expected," this has some of that same flavor. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.